Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn coming to you live from the camera store. Tonight we have the pleasure of speaking to a group of local Calgary-based photographers about their work in the exhibit, 6 Points of View at the 500 Collective Gallery. 6 Point of View features a series of photographers that represent unique artistic vision as 6 different mid-career photographers. Oh, sorry, we just had a little echo there. They're exhibiting a beautiful assortment of production styles and techniques, including cyanotype, carbon ink, and conventional printing. We're also going to hear from 5 of the 6 photographers tonight who are able to join us for this panel talk, and that's excluding one, Visti, who is away off the grid at the moment, but we'll get to hear a little bit about his work as well. And soon we're going to hear from Steve Spear, Richard Collins, Greg Gorilla, and Royce Howland, and Andrew Miller. So I appreciate their willingness just to share with all these artists. And of course, a lot of you guys are joining us live right now. And the best part about going live is being able to interact with you. So if you're logged into YouTube, you can join us in the chat. Ask questions at any time. We're going to have kind of more of a panel talk towards the end once everybody can introduce their work. But just throw those questions as soon as you think them. Any comments that you have, we'd love to hear from you. And before I bring them on, I just wanted to also share that I was able to visit the new 500 Collective Gallery for the opening of their exhibit. And it's right by the Christine Klassen Gallery. If you're familiar, if you're in Calgary, you've maybe been there before. But it's a wonderful exhibition in a beautiful space. And if you're in Calgary, you have to check it out. There's still some dates available. So actually this Saturday for the Thanksgiving long weekend, you can go between 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. It's also going to be open on the 15th of October, same time, 11 to 5. And it's just a must-see, especially if you're like me and you haven't been to a photo exhibit in a long time in person. There's just something so magical and special about being able to see photographs in the print. It's just a totally different experience. So that's my plug for that, is make sure that you check it out if you're local, or if you're not too far away, maybe make a little drive down. So if you want to check it out on Facebook, it's 6, the number, IX Show YYC, and you can also find them on Instagram. We'll plug the links into the chat here shortly. But the first guest that I'm going to introduce to you is someone that's very special to Camera Store. He's been immersed in photography since before the Camera Store even existed, and his area of interests are the rural and urban landscape at home and abroad. He loves to travel, and he mostly exhibits in black and white. Sometimes I've seen a little bit of color from Steve, but I'd say most of his work that I've been a witness to has been black and white. And he recently did an interview with Todd Correll, and in the interview and in his artist statement, he talked about photography as a recollective device. So he's going to share a little bit about that and how photography brings back memories with complete intimacy and detail. His black and white work of rural places features prints from his 4x5 film negative library. And I'm very excited to welcome Steve Spear. Thanks so much for joining us, Steve.
Thanks, Evelyn. Thank you. So we're each allotted 5 minutes to kind of do our thing here at the beginning. I just want to go quickly through a bit of my history. For those who don't know me, which is probably most of you, I have had a camera in hand since I bought my first camera in 1973, and I've been shooting consistently for my entire adult life. I studied at the Alberta College of Art and Design, and I have been a practicing visual artist for the past 30 years doing graphic design and photography. But photography has always had a special interest to me, to the point where I consider photography to be a lifestyle, not a hobby. And it's definitely a passion. So I'll shoot forever. So with regards to the current show now, I'm going to share my screen and show some images while I'm talking.
Excellent.
And we'll just get quickly.
Oh,
all right,
great one to start with.
Yeah, so with regards to the show, when we were talking as a group about putting together a show, I knew I wanted to show 4x5. I wanted to revisit some of my old images, and I wanted to show landscape. And the initial, I'm going to show 11 images here, which were my initial cull, and then I'll show you or explain how I whittled it down to the the 5 that are in the show. So with regards to the and I just want to see if I can get to full screen here. There we go. So with regards to the imagery, again, all 4x5. And what really appealed to me about this process was I was looking at images, some of which I haven't looked at for more than 20 years. And the idea of naming the show "Photography as a Recollective Device" came from looking back at these images and remembering all of the details that were part of the process of capturing the images in the first place. So this shot here is from Etsicom, Alberta, and I'm just going to go through the images quickly, and I'll explain them as I go. This image here is from Delia, the exterior of the East Cooley Elementary School. Interior of a derelict house in Moseley, Alberta. I think there are two churches. There's United and Presbyterian Church side by side. This is out in Dorothy, and this church looks nothing like this now. It's been completely refurbished and has, in my mind, has totally lost its photogenic properties. These are some of the images that didn't go on the show. So the ones that I just showed were the ones that I ultimately picked. These were a few of the others that didn't make the cut, and for various reasons. I was initially considering maybe doing more traditional landscape, but then I decided to focus on the abandonment as kind of my key focus. And then these are the images at the show. So I knew I wanted to print big. These are 30 by 40 inch image size, framed to 40 by 50. And all of these images were printed by Royce Howland, who's one of our crew. And it was a very interactive process working with Royce. I worked up the images to what I thought was a decent image, ready to print, and then sent them to Royce. Royce was fairly gentle in contacting me, saying these images could use a little more work. So I wound up going down to his print studio. We sat shoulder by shoulder at his computer and went through all of the images and made final tweaks and adjustments to get the final prints. And this is the show as it stands. So I know we've got 5 minutes. I think that I'll just stop there. We can talk about things further as we go. So.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Steve. So I mentioned it briefly earlier, but if you want to hear a little bit more and see more of the scale of what these prints look like, you can check out that interview with Todd Corral. I just popped the link to that in the chat, and I'm also just popping in the Facebook link too. So if you're in Calgary, you want to get all the details, definitely check that out. So our next guest from the group is Richard Collins, and he's a fine art photographer also based in Calgary, and he has a desire for adventure and road trips and finding beauty in nature and otherwise mundane surroundings. And then although Richard has had a camera in his hand since he was young, he really started taking things seriously later in life, focusing more on the quality and artistry of his photographs. He also primarily shoots black and white, but in this exhibit he documented a very colorful assortment of rural photographs. So I want to welcome Richard. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Evelyn. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I like you said, I had a camera in my hand all my life, but I was primarily did a lot of drawings and paintings, and I used my photographs as reference for those drawings and paintings. If I wanted to, I'd take a photo of a mountain scene, a photo of a 56 Ford on a highway, and then I'd have a painting of a 56 Ford driving into the mountains. So those sorts of things. Of course, life gets in the way. I started drawing a whole lot less and painting a whole lot less, but I still had my camera. And so later in life, I wound up deciding to abandon, although I didn't completely abandon it, it's pretty much abandoned, the drawing and painting, and decided to take my photography a little bit more seriously, and just stick with focusing on the images of what I see, and not just the imagery, but the capturing the spirit of the things that I believe there's a spirit inside of everything. And if you can capture that spirit, it's wonderful. And this, you mentioned this was a departure. I do largely print in black and white. This is a departure for me for some pretty significant reasons. These were shot largely during, I'll share my screen here actually,
Yes.
largely during COVID. I went from, 2020 was going to be the best year in my career, turned out to be one of the worst. I wound up, had an overseas contract, wound up losing that, was having relationship issues, was having difficulty finding follow-up work. And I don't think I know anybody that's more optimistic than me. So even no matter how optimistic you are, that's still a lot of burden to carry. So I did wind up, getting out, and there's no better place for outdoor isolation than Saskatchewan. And the images that I selected really capture kind of not only what I was going through, but a lot of people are going through in lockdown, like kind of that stagnant decay that everything inside is crumbling, but there's still light outside, there's still love outside, there's another life that you want to live other than the life you're living right now during the lockdown. So the color in these images, as opposed to the black and white that I normally shoot, kind of represents that optimism in still looking through that decay for whatever you see outside. So this love out the window kind of represents that, probably the best image to represent that, especially around the failing relationship, the decay inside. And then there's no quarter for the sheriff. This is inside of a sheriff's quarters, looking at the view is obstructed by the hills in the not too distant, that are not too far away. You can't see beyond those hills. The tank is full. This is kind of the love that you seek, and the love of getting outside, and really the optimism shining through. I love this shot in particular, not because of the heart, but the texture of the waves and the siding on the building. And there's almost a character to that building, like it's defying its own mortality. And then pool view, which is another colorful shot. I was attracted by those colors, and this kind of reminded me. It's almost like reminded me of a Zoom call where you're doing your work, through a little box, a little screen in front of you, at a distance. Definitely a departure. Also in size, this is much smaller than I normally work, but it's probably, I feel it's one of the stronger, probably my strongest body of work today, just because of the heightened emotion behind it.
Wonderful. Now, Richard, you have another gallery, or you're also exhibiting in another space, is that correct?
I have a gallery that we're all part of. It's Carbon Point Gallery. It's primarily an online gallery, but we'll do pop-up brick and mortar galleries from time to time. Excellent.
Yeah, I'll pop a link to that as well in the chat here. And then next up we have Greg Gurla. And Greg is another long-term friend of the Camera Store and is well known in the community. He's a commercial and fine art photographer working in Calgary, Alberta, and he's represented by several stock agencies, and his work's been published worldwide. In the exhibition, he shared images from a special project titled Homecoming, featuring images from his hometown in Lethbridge, Alberta. Welcome, Greg. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Evelyn. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Greg Gurla. I'll give you a really quick, brief history of sort of what I've been doing. Like Steve, I was a student, the Alberta College of Art is what it was called back in the day. And I was in the photo program there for 4 years. And once I graduated from there, started shooting commercially. And I've run a commercial studio right to the present date. But also now kind of diversifying more into a little bit more of the fine art and exhibition work. I've also been teaching at the Alberta College of Art, which is now the Alberta University of the Arts.
It's hard to keep track.
I think it's changed like 4 times since I've been affiliated with it. But I've been doing that up until about 2 years ago for about 15 years. So I'll share a screen and just show some of the work that is up in my part of the show here. And let me go full screen if I can here. Oops, hang on. Let's try that again. 1 second. We'd worked through all this before. All right. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. So, like I mentioned, these shots were all done in Lethbridge, which is my hometown. And I was there for the year 2020 and 2021. And it was looking after my mom. She was in Lethbridge, and she was elderly and reaching the end of her life. And I had I guess the privilege of being there for that time in her life. And during that time, I just sort of wandered through different parts in Lethbridge. I would hop on a bike and wheel around to places that I remembered visiting or that were part of my life as a child. And I think at that time, I was shooting them not really knowing what they would be for. It was just more therapy for myself, a chance to get out and put my mind somewhere else. And I remember one time while in Lethbridge, a good friend and fellow photographer, Wes Bell, was visiting from Medicine Hat, and we got together for a coffee. And some of these shots I'd been posting on Instagram, and so we had a great talk about these images. And you know, he really, you know, he said, "Why are you shooting these? What are they for?" And I said, "No, at that time I didn't know why I was shooting them." And he said, "Well, you need to find out why." And you know, up until I got back here to Calgary, that reasoning never. It probably was subconscious in my head, but I never really had a reason for it until Royce had said, "Hey, let's throw this exhibition together. What do you want to show?" And this body of work came up, and then I thought about, well, what we had to write an artist statement, and that really helped me to gel what was in my subconscious mind as to why I took these pictures. And like I say, it sort of became this circle of my hometown and being a kid and having a parent, and that full circle coming around to coming back as an adult, and my mom dying and going out to revisit this subject. And it just it was very therapeutic for me. And so unlike the other fellows, a lot of the shots of mine are quite small. The images themselves, I think, are about 6 by 6 inches. And for me, it was consciously printed that way because I wanted the viewer to see them in a very intimate sense, where they had to come close and look at the shots. So rather than having this big grand images, they were very small and very intimate. And so that's sort of what those were about.
Excellent. Did you have a picture that showed them on the wall?
Yes, I do. Let me get that.
Just to give a little bit of perspective of what the feel of it is, I think would be cool for the viewers.
That's actually really good.
But yeah, it definitely stands out within the gallery space, and does force you to come very close to it, and then and just kind of become part of it.
All black and white, and just sort of set up in a grid 4x4.
Perfect.
Good.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Thank you.
All right, so next up we have Andrew Miller, and he has had prints featured in several galleries, including work in the Exposure Photography Festival. And just tiny little plug for that, it's going to come up again this winter in February. So it's our Calgary Photography Festival. It's always great for all the community to come together, but Andrew's been involved in that. And he has a passion for showing people the world in the way that they've never seen before by using different perspectives and media. And his work is rooted in the abstract, but with a real connection to the world we live in. And your prints are cyanotype in this exhibit. And so welcome, Andrew. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'll go back to sort of where this kind of series started. A lot of my photography work falls into different series. And so this one's called Econolis, and sort of the beginning idea of that actually started with homesteads, very similar to what Steve had. And doing a lot of photography on the prairies and stuff, I was kind of got me thinking about how people, they moved out there and sort of built their dream and stuff like that. And eventually circumstances changed. And so they had to change their dream or abandon their dream, as you will. And then I was thinking about the same kind of thing with industry, how industry's changing and stuff's consolidating. We're seeing that a lot sort of over COVID, and industry moving out of North America overseas. And so that sort of was sort of the impetus, if you will, or whatever, for this series, and sort of how it kind of gelled together in my mind, at least. So I'll just bring up one of the images here. So this one's called Heartland, and all the images in the show are from a sawmill just outside of Trail, BC, which is no longer there. And it was totally abandoned when I took these images. And part of the reason I chose cyanotypes is one of the first sort of printing processes. And I knew with the toning that I would able to get sort of a sepia tone and sort of warm up sort of the cold industrial that you'd get from the cyanotypes. So giving it more of a person feel. A lot of these places that I photographed, they have a lot of like gloves on the floor with names on them, like mugs and stuff, and sort of personal items that people have just kind of left behind, very similar to what you find in homesteads, where like cupboards still have food in them and stuff like that. And so I wanted to kind of bring out a little bit of the humanity rather than the raw industrial feel, and still kind of touch on sort of the changes that we're seeing in industry and just jobs and stuff like that as sort of capitalism kind of progresses, I guess.
Wonderful, thank you. So last but not least, we have Royce Howland, who has a special role in this exhibition. So not only is he a fine art photographer himself, but he's also a master printer and has helped some of these photographers, as well as photographers all around the city, print their work to their liking and sometimes maybe even beyond. And in this exhibition, he's showcasing industrial landscapes featuring imagery of a few abandoned mining locations across Alberta. And I just want to say thank you so much, Royce. It sounds like you had a lot to do with having this group come together and just putting the show together in the first place.
We were fortunate having a venue that we were able to get into that suddenly developed, and that's a shout out to Christine Clausen and her new venture, the 500 Collective, which has really just been newly created. And so we are the first exhibit in the 500 Collective gallery. And once it became clear that that gallery was going to launch around the time of September, I contacted a few of these guys that we had been talking, kind of one-on-one for a while, feeling COVID, and feeling the pressure to do something and to show and, to work together and collaborate on something creative. Hey, we now have an opportunity. Do we actually want to band a few of us together and mount a show? And so we decided to do it in the span of 6 weeks, from a standing start, having virtually nothing, including the venue, which was still a shell, like an empty light industrial shell. In 6 weeks, between Christine and her side on putting the 500 Collective gallery into operation, and then on us producing our disparate shows, we had the entire thing created from nothing basically to a full exhibit in 6 weeks. So that was actually a lot of fun, a lot of hard work, but a lot of fun. So my ambition to do it was, like a lot of the other guys have referred to, we have COVID, we're all getting a little on in years and things start to happen. You have life events, you have career events, and I think many of us probably can relate to that on a personal level. And I was feeling the need to do something creative. I first turned to, and I'm going to share my screen here, just throw some images up. I turned to photography as a way to, I don't know, have a little bit of escape from the career high pressure working in IT originally, lots of deadlines, you know, everything was always having to be done with more with less budget, less people, less time, the whole 9 yards. So very stressful. And I would take up the camera and either go locally, as here at the National Music Center in downtown Calgary, or I would travel and I would seek things that would kind of get me out of my head, you know, out of stress. Many cases originally in my photography, I would go to the landscape and I would go to wilderness and trying to just completely get away from the human-made environment, from the business environment, from the concrete jungle and the rat race. And so whether I was traveling in old kind of abandoned cane fields in the Caribbean as seen here, or at strange places that you find in the desert in the middle of Arizona with interesting creatures, whether it's in Saskatchewan in the middle of nowhere, whether it's in Iceland, which I absolutely completely fell in love with. I was seeking with the landscape to really escape from that high pressure. But the very fact that I was in what I thought was wilderness that was taking me away from humankind and from technology and from all these things, the fact that I was actually there meant it wasn't really wilderness at all. If it was wilderness, I couldn't be there. That's kind of the whole point of wilderness. Whereas I jumped on a plane or I jumped in a car, I flew there, I drove there, I had a hotel not far from there, I had all my technology, I had power, I had food, I had everything. So it's not really wilderness. I began to realize then that maybe what I needed to do was try to resolve this conflict that I had, which is I live in an urban area, I live in a high-tech industry, I live around, you know, the need to make a living and all these kind of artificial constructs that we have in urban areas that enable us to exist here out of nature in a very unnatural way. I needed to resolve the fact that that's where I live and exist with my draw towards the wild environment, to wilderness and to the land. And what I came up with as an idea for one of the major themes of my work is the idea of cultural landscape, which is where either the fusion or the conflict of people and human culture and human industry and all of that kind of stuff comes either up against or in harmony or in some sort of other relationship with the land. Andrew mentioned something about people having a dream, and so coming to either homestead or coming to run in a sawmill or in a place like this, which was a coal mine. They were pursuing economic opportunities, you know, for family reasons, for various other reasons. So I began to really pursue that, which is the idea of the cultural landscape. And sometimes it's more landscape, sometimes it's more culture, sometimes it's a balance of the two. But in all of them, what I'm trying to do is wrestle with my own kind of dependence on existence in this high-tech urban environment, and then my hunger to be in the land and to be in wilderness and to have that balancing thing to restore something that I feel is missing to me in my urban high-tech environment. Like Andrew, I do favor a lot of abstracts, and so I'll often work with something like this, which is an old rusty car at a mine up in the mountains west of Nordegg. I just love the play of the light on it and the simple lines, and then underlying it all, just this incredible rusty, lichen encrusted, peeling paint kind of texture. Everything that I do really is drawn to print as well, because I am a printmaker as well as a photographer. So I'm always thinking in terms of printing, and what I shoot is for print. Digital is not my primary means, and often most of what I shoot I never put in a digital format online or anything. It's either destined for print or I just don't really go anywhere with it at all. So I'm drawn to light, I'm drawn to textures, and then I'm thinking about papers, I'm thinking about inks, I'm thinking about tone, and I'm thinking about the zone system. You know, where are my blacks, where are my whites, where are my grays, what's my contrast, where are my forms, what are my lines? All of these kinds of things are informing how I shoot and what I shoot, because I'm always developing to print. So it could be an abstract like this. It could be something more representational like this. I don't often shoot things like this that has some explicit messaging in it. This one says brotherhood. And then if you notice, there's also a little subtext under there that says war. And so in this case, I labeled this one choices. This one I called coming unhinged, because I was kind of feeling a little bit of that during COVID and coming out of COVID. But this one is called choices, which my selection of that into the exhibit was also based on COVID, and we all have choices to make. And I think the pandemic has illustrated to us, we have choices to make at an individual level on how we live our lives, how we relate to each other as communities, and so on. So that was really my basis for including both of these in print form, and having them show kind of, I think, in a harmonious way with the work from the other 6 guys.
Excellent. Now, Royce, of course, we had one guest that wasn't able to join us this evening, and I was hoping you could say a few words about their work and perhaps show some of the imagery as well.
Yeah, for sure. So the 6th member of our band is out working in Saskatchewan right now in the field. Not a lot of connectivity there, but even if he did, he's too busy. So this is Visti Kerr. I've known Visti for a few years now. Like me, he works in oil and gas, although I've since forsaken my oil and gas career. But he's drawn to the land as well. Like many of us, he's drawn to industrial aspects of it, but also to the land and landscape aspects of it. And I think in a very complementary way is trying to explore that boundary between people and our presence on the land and what we're doing and how we're doing it there. And so he included a series of works that he photographed while he was in Tuktoyaktuk with his father a few years ago. It was an idea to go up there, and just trying to get his work up here. His father had worked in the Arctic many, many years before, but hadn't been back. And so they had always had an idea to do a road trip up to the Arctic again. And so they did. They drove, went all the way up to Tuk. And both of them are photographers. His dad has been a photographer for many, many years. And I think obviously there was an inspiration around Visti to follow in his footsteps, which he has admirably done. And so they had a great time up there, fantastic road trip. Anybody who knows him and knows or knew his dad would know the feast that they would have had, thinking as photographers, but also as great adventurers and great explorers, willing to get out and see what the land has to offer. So Visti's work is all in color. The other body of color work in our show, the rest of us are mostly doing black and whites for exhibit. Visti is a film photographer and also a digital photographer, but like the rest of us, print is a huge deal for him. And so he's always thinking in terms of print. He's thinking in terms of the representation as the tangible object and how he's going to see things through the viewfinder and how that's going to translate into print. His work is very minimalist. I think the rest of us have a lot of rich details and textures and tones. Again, Visti kind of went contrary to that with these very minimal, spare compositions that really show the huge sky, the flat horizon lines, the distance that you get when you're kind of up at, to me, feeling very much at the edge of the earth, where you're just looking at and the horizon just is flat and just vanishes, far away from you. So that's a little bit about Visti and his work, which is hanging at our show.
Wonderful. So I'm going to plug it again for those that are joining us a little bit late, but if you are in the Calgary area, do make sure that you check out the show. I did post a link in the chat, but it's the 6, spelled with the number 6, IX, show YYC, and it's in the 500 Collective, which is a brand new gallery right near the Christine Klassen gallery. And yeah, so we want to get to some questions. So I had prepared a few, and of course, if there's any from the chat, if you guys have any questions at all, or you want these guys to address anything, let us know. But to start things off, I'm going to point this one to Richard, just because you've displayed your work obviously in galleries before, but you have an online gallery, and of course all of us tend to share a lot of our work online these days. Why is it important to you and the photographic community to showcase your work in a physical exhibition?
Well, I think for me, photography is a very expressive medium. If you haven't noticed, I have difficulty articulating the thoughts that are in my head. So the creative process in photography seems to be a good expressive format for me. For me, photograph isn't real until it's printed. When you look at it photo after it's been printed, it's like seeing it for the first time. I would like to say maybe that's just me, but I know other people that feel the same way. And as far as exhibiting in a brick and mortar instance versus online, online is very, it's built for mass consumption in a number of ways, but most importantly, it's, the amount of information that's out there, the good, the bad, the sensationalized. Mm-hmm. And by printing and exhibiting, the feeling that you want to convey as an artist is a little bit more complete. And it can be consumed in more than just two dimensions. The materials you choose, the tactile, well, obviously in an exhibition, you can't really feel the paper, but you could, definitely see the difference between a printed image and something that's two-dimensional online.
Yeah. Well, let's point that to Andrew then, because in your case, Andrew, you're creating prints in a more traditional sense. So why is that important to you, and what is that process like in deciding to create your photographs into these prints?
Right. Well, and we had a bit of a discussion, because some of us are starting with film and ending with a digital print, and I'm actually starting with these ones with a digital image and going to a more traditional route. For these, I try to match the type of printing I'm doing to the subject matter, and I just thought in this for this series that was what fit. I do the same with paintings and other alternative processes I do. It has to kind of fit the subject matter. Some things work better in oil painting versus watercolor, or vice versa, and I think the subject matter or what I wanted to convey just works a lot better in this process with the deckle edge watercolor paper, and sort of the hand treatment sort of pays homage, I guess, to the subject and the work, and the amount of work that was involved by myself to get the image and the workers working in these facilities, I guess. Yeah.
Excellent. Do you enjoy crafting prints in a traditional way? Is the physical process enjoyable to you, or is it just a means to an end to be able to get that look?
Well, a lot of these I was producing when it was about 30 degrees out, so it was maybe not quite as enjoyable as other times, but yeah. And whether it's whether I'm doing printing off a printer or manually, I find both fulfilling, I guess. Yeah.
Fulfillment. Speaking of fulfillment, I want to point a question to Steve. We've chatted a lot over the years, and of course I've heard some interviews with you as well, talking about photography just being so immersed into your lifestyle, and that it does bring you fulfillment. And I know a couple of you others have talked about it as being like a therapeutic device. So what does that mean in terms of your photographic process? When does it begin and when does it end when you're creating a body of work?
So what's interesting about what you said, you mentioned the word process, and you and I have had this conversation about photography as a process, which relates to the question that you asked first. It is thinking about moving to a print. To me, the print is the culmination of a number of steps in a process, including image capture, image processing, if you're working in the darkroom or on the desktop, looking at doing your work prints, working up to a fine print, mounting and matting it, framing it, hanging it, and that's where the gallery comes in. The gallery is kind of like the ultimate display of your imagery, to have it hung in as a body of work, and I'll talk about that in a second, but hung as a body of work and in a fine environment. It just is it just gets into you. It's something that I couldn't describe it completely, but it is very important to me as a visual artist. I just feel the need to create, and creating this way is just how I approach it. I could have been a painter, I could have been a sculptor. I'm a photographer, and to me, photography is as much an art form as any of the other art forms. It's just a matter of approach and your approach to process, which I think is the common thread among all of them.
Yeah. Now, Greg, in your case, you put together the body of work of Homecoming, and you said initially you didn't necessarily have a plan for it to be, this project or this exhibit. How did it come to that, and how did you edit down your work to decide what was going to go into it? How do you decide what's the good, the bad, the ugly, the best? What's that process like for you?
It's a difficult process, but probably one of the most important too. I know I've always said, when I've been teaching classes, I've said to the students, one of the most important things you do is your editing process. And it's particularly more difficult, I think, in some cases these days, because with digital equipment, you're not limited by the material. A roll of film, you were limited to, 36 frames. Whereas with a digital gear, you can shoot and shoot and shoot. And that makes the editing process a lot more difficult. I think one of the lucky things for me with this body of work was I already sort of knew what places I was going to go to, because they were places that had already resonated with me, not in a photographic way, but as a kid growing up in that town.
As a memory.
Memory played a big part of it. One of the things in this group that I had shot along with some of these structures were down at the river bottom in the coulees. So there were some really great images of the coulees, these sort of hills and valleys in the river. And my first set of edits included both those types of work. And then it was a case of just pulling it up on the screen and having a look and saying, how is this group of work? How do I make the message stronger or a little more clear? And to me, it was very easy to say, well, this has got to be these buildings and these structures. Maybe the coulees will be another body of work for another wall at some point in the future. But the editing process is very, very important, because it's just another way for the artist to convey that message. You have your artist statement, which sort of explains what you're doing. But, the body of work that people are seeing is going to convey a message. Each image, of course, does that singularly, but the group has to do that as well. And the more clear that cohesive message is, I think the more successful that body of work becomes.
Does it get any easier? I know this is something that you've taught for many years, and do you find now where you are in your photography career that process is easier? Is it harder?
For me, it's easier. I don't know
That's
if that's
great.
unusual. Maybe you should ask the other guys. I think, a lot like shooting, I found, when I was first starting out, I was, so hung up on the technical aspects, and I was thinking about everything and then doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the more I did it, it's almost like learning to read, where you start out learning the sound of each letter, and then you sound out words, and then you sound out sentences. But before you know it, you read without really doing these things.
Yeah. What a good point! What a good point, Greg. That is a real key one. Like learning the technology to the point where it becomes second nature, so you can focus on the art and not the technology. It becomes transparent, and that's a real key point.
And I think it's the same thing happens with editing, where it becomes almost like a second nature or subconscious, or maybe a lot less forefront and a lot less struggle. At least that's how it's been for me, I found.
What about you, Royce? Especially with being a printmaker for other photographers and kind of sometimes dragging them through the editing process of choosing what they're going to print. And you were talking about like all the details that you're thinking and how it shapes how you're making these images. Has it become an easier process for you, or harder as now you're more tuned into those details with printing?
I think it's one of those classic things where there's a curve up front where you're thinking about all the details and struggling with them, and then you think you've got it together, and then you hit this middle area where you're practicing stuff, but really all your work is kind of crap. And so you're feeling like there's this
Speak
bottoming
for
out
yourself.
despite we'll talk later. Despite all your technical mastery, you feel like you're not achieving what you want, and you're thinking, well, I have the gear, I have the Photoshop, I have the maybe the film or the chemistry, but I can't get it together. And then you keep pushing and developing, and you come to the point where, for us in this body of work, and for a significant area that all 6 of us work in, which is on the art side of the street, that stuff gets subsumed into your subconscious, and you're no longer, like Greg just said, it's not at the forefront of your brain anymore. You're not thinking about the technical, but you're also not thinking of, oh my God, composition. You know, I've got the Fibonacci spiral, and I've got to do all this kind of stuff. You know, the golden mean and all this kind of thing. Instead, you've subsumed all of that into your thinking, and it's now part of your muscle memory, your creative muscle memory. Your brain is a muscle, and you need to exercise it. And so the job of the artist is to experience the world, take it all in, chew on it, love it, fight with it, be confused by it, hate it, you know, wrestle with it, and then eventually come to some sort of terms with what you've experienced in the world, and then you're expressing it back out. And so as photographers, we do that with the camera, with the choice of black and white or color, with the lens. We do that with the processing we do. We do it with cropping. We do it with composition, what's in the frame, what's out of the frame. Then we do it with printing. What kind of paper? Is it color or black and white there? Is it a smoother textured? How big? You know, is it a small one like Greg? Lovely little 6x6 cameos. Is it big ones like Steve and I predominantly have done? All of those kinds of things then become part of your expressive fingerprint, if you will. And the only way to get there is just by doing a lot of work. You have to do the work, and you have to keep doing it to find the thing that works for you. And when you reach that point, it does become easier. But you only get to that easy point after it's hard. I know some natural talents for whom they just took to it like a duck to water, and I'm kind of envious because they just like fell off a log and were making great work almost instantaneously, it seemed like. But I think the vast majority of us, that's not true. Absolutely. We work and we work, we struggle, we fight, we're unhappy, we're unsatisfied, but we're driving and we're trying to find something. And if you keep at it, then you reach sort of this breakthrough where now you crystallize what you meant, what you thought, what you felt, what you want to say, with sufficient mastery of the tools and the techniques and the work process to actually express that in a way that's satisfying.
Excellent. Thanks, Royce.
Yeah.
So I have a question actually that was emailed in from Lisa for Richard. So because your work primarily has been the black and white prints that you exhibit, can you talk a little bit more about your choice for color with images? Maybe you can pull up your screen one more time just so we can get a feel for it. But these are extremely vivid, beautiful colored images. But to me, they almost have a little bit of like the tone of, you could see them as being black and white. So what was the process there for deciding to go color?
Well, for me, it was probably more emotion than anything else. Like I said, it was a dark time, and taking the subject matter being kind of an expression of how I felt. Like I said, with the decay outside or inside that a lot of us felt during lockdown. Royce kind of brought this together for me. He mentioned Rage Against the Dying of the Light. That's exactly what this is. It's kind of my expression for kicking out against this lockdown, against, I'm not going to go quietly into the night. I'm going to, and, so for me, this vivid color really caught, like I said, my optimism. That's more what it represents. And although it might look good in black and white, it's not just the aesthetic appeal I'm looking for. It's kind of the message out of the whole photo. This one in particular, it's, you can see it's almost like there is a life inside that room. You see the yellow over here. It's like there's a lamp off on the table, just out of the frame. It's like it's still a living thing. Something like that you wouldn't capture in black and white. So it's, I don't see printing this any other way, regardless of how it would look in black and white.
Thank you. So for Andrew, I want to know what attracted you to printing your photographs in the more traditional medium. Was there someone or something that inspired you to work in that way?
Well, I do print digitally too in color and black and white. Cyanotypes have been something I've been working on for probably 10 to 15 years now, and started out with the more traditional, just taking leaves or objects and making prints that way. And then I do a lot with alternative process stuff like alcohol transfers and stuff like that. And so started into making digital negatives. And one of the goals this year was to expand my negative size up to 44 inches now, and be able to make like screen print negatives and stuff like that. And part of that all along was to make the larger cyanotypes. The ones in the show are like 22 by 30, like full watercolor sheet. And yeah, for these it just fit. Like I think the rest of the guys have kind of talked about it a little bit, and I know Royce and I have talked about it. Like a lot of times when I'm looking at a scene, I almost can visualize sort of what fits and what the finished product is, like everything from like lens choice, angle of where you're going to take the image, all the way to what it could potentially look like on the wall. And there's always exceptions to that, where you think it's going to be one thing and then it turns out, well, no, it actually works better this way. But for the most part, I think all of us potentially do this, is that we've been at it long enough that we know sort of, once we see it, what we want to do with it.
Excellent. Steve, when you're looking at a framed photograph, what are some of the things that you look at that makes you understand and realize that this is quality? In your case, you were blowing up 4x5 negatives. Can you talk a little bit about how you were able to create that and what makes your prints unique in this exhibit?
Okay, I don't know that I'd call my prints unique, but they are of a scale that is present. And when when we were meeting initially as a group, when I was thinking about what I wanted to show, I knew I wanted to go 4x5, and I knew I wanted to go big. And to me, like 30 by 40, it's a standard size in terms of the materials that are available for framing and glass and matte board and that sort of thing. So I have printed bigger, but this to me was a good kind of intermediate. Well, it's not even intermediate size. They're big prints any way you look at it. They have, but in terms of the quality of presentation, like the working with Royce was a real integral part of this process, because I did the scans, I did the initial editing to get them to a point where I thought they were good, but then going in and sitting with Royce and working up, like I learned things from Royce that I have taken away and I will apply to my printing when I'm printing in studio smaller images and the like. But it's working with Royce got me to a point where the images were strong. They're printed on Hahnemühle, I think William Turner Royce.
Sounds right.
We did museum etching.
Museum etching. So the paper has a tangible quality, and we live in a golden age with regards to the materials that are available for us to produce our imagery on, and like these images, it almost feels a shame to put them behind glass, but that's the way they're presented, presented with an 8-ply matte board, which is the double thick, so that has a presence. They're consistently framed all across the board, so when you look at them, the materials and the scale and all presents them as a body of work, and then the imagery emphasizes that as well, that this is a body of work, that the images tie from one to the other, and they're hung in a way like we all curated everyone else's images when we were hanging. Everybody was looking at everyone's work. We were making selections. Oh, maybe you should move this one second in the row, you know. So it wasn't just me saying, this is the way I want to show them. I was taking feedback. I know Greg was standing by my side when we were looking in, and as was Andrew, who was hanging across the hallway from me. But there are many things that go into putting together an exhibit that go way beyond just printing your art and slapping it up on the wall. There's a lot of thought that goes into it, and it all plays on how the images are presented to the world and how they're interpreted by the viewers as well. You set a pacing based on the way your images are ordered, and all of those things are very important to the overall impression.
Greg, what was the experience for you putting together this exhibit compared to some of your previous experiences? And how does somebody go about putting together an exhibit? What's a good way to do it?
The big difference with this one, and Royce had mentioned this, is that we did it in 6 weeks, which
right, that's crazy.
I mean, even now, I still kind of can't believe it, because quite often shows like, I think I've had stuff exhibit for Exposure Festival in February, and a year goes into putting that together. And so that was one of the things with this group is how quickly it happened. And the other thing too is that, I mean, we all pretty much knew each other, but we didn't know what each of us was going to bring to the table, as in this body of work, and how it was all going to gel together. And it was, I think, just a real, whether it was coincidence or luck, or the photo got us smiling down at us, everything just really came together really well, where the work, each body of work that each of these artists put together was very cohesive on their own, but as a group show, there was still this cohesiveness with the entire amount of work that we were showing. And that can be really difficult, and really can make or break a group show. So I think for us, it was it just happened to come together quickly. Everybody was really focused. We did have a meeting every week where we would say, this is what we're doing, here's what we need to do. Richard was great at putting out timelines, and Steve saying, I still need this artist statement from so and so. So I think not only did we work hard for ourselves, but we helped each other. We pushed each other to make sure that it all came together. Mm-hmm. But overall, a really great experience, and like I say, I'm really gratified that that these guys were professional enough to make me look good in putting such a great body of work together.
Yeah, no, you guys seem like a good team, and it kind of reminds me of people talking about finding your people and being able to push each other along and make things happen, like get the ball rolling, and so it's great to see that you guys were able to achieve that. Royce, what about you? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just say we only got to a fight once or twice.
Just
once. I can't remember.
That was over the Snickers bars.
Yeah.
The snacks, the opening.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, more Doritos.
It's good for the kids. When you bring the kids out to the gallery show, it's great to have snacks, for sure. Royce, what about you? What's your thought on finding inspiration to be able to put something like this together? Does inspiration find you, or is it something that you're seeking?
I think I identify very much with the idea that inspiration often finds me. I will occasionally be really motivated, and I think there's a discipline if you want to be a working artist as opposed to somebody for whom it's a casual pastime, and that's all great. I started in photography just as a hobbyist, and it was a casual thing that I did, but I reached a point where it became a pretty driving passion for me, even though I was still in my first career at the time, and then I jettisoned my first career and kind of adopted photography as something that I wanted to be professionally engaged in. And so if you're going to be a professional, you do need to drive yourself, whether you're inspired or not. But there's an artist who passed away not too long ago in the States called Chuck Close. He was a portraitist, very famous guy. And he said, The professionals just show up and get to work. It's the amateurs that sit around waiting for the lightning bolt out of the blue to strike them. What you do is when you make the work and get to work, that's when the inspiration finds you. And I've generally found that to be true. I'll often have a plan in my head, that's part of the discipline of making work. You're disciplined and you do work. Writers will tell you that you need to write every day, and it doesn't matter if you feel inspired or not, you need to write every day if you want to be a professional author. But it's the act of doing it that leads you to become inspired, because you may do something and not like it, but then that leads you to an idea of something to do different, and maybe you don't like that either, and so you try something different, and then suddenly you realize there's something there's a thread that you start to pull on. So you keep riffing on ideas, or you bounce off of walls and you go another direction, and eventually the inspiration finds you. I've had plenty of times when I've had shooter's block and I just haven't known what to do, and I've kind of sat there and I've moped, and I've done whatever. And the thing that usually gets me out of it is I just pick up the camera and I start shooting. And I don't even know I don't know what I'm shooting. I don't know why I'm shooting it, and I know what I'm shooting for. But as I start to do it, the inspiration finds me, and I rediscover the joy of getting out of here and starting to see through this and getting my mind projected out into the world and trying to understand what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling about it, and how I want to express it. So for me, it's very much inspiration finding me thing. And that's really, I think, what we came to here. We had an opportunity and the inspiration crystallized from outside. We had all been talking for, weeks or months in some cases, years in some. And then suddenly there was an opportunity to get a venue, and boom, the inspiration found us, and we came together really quick, and we expressed something that I feel really we're all very satisfied with.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Was there anything else that any of you guys wanted to add before we wrap things up this evening?
Actually, one thing I'd like to say, which relates to something that Royce just said, for any young photographers who might be watching it at this time, very important. Royce said, get out and shoot every day. I have what's called the 3 Ps, and those are to practice, to print, and to peruse. So practice, get out and use your camera, print your stuff. It's a totally different scenario to see your image in a rear lit screen on your computer, on your tablet, as opposed to printing and holding up a reflected light image and feeling the tangible quality of the paper. And peruse, look at other people's work. Come on out and look at the show. It's worth seeing. As humbly as I'm able to say, it's a show worth seeing. And these other guys carry me.
Yeah, there's so many great resources within Calgary. Your show being one of them. Of course, I'm sitting here in the camera store with an amazing collection of photography books. So come here. You don't have to look at gear. Just like make a hard left, come into the book nook, and you can spend hours. We have some people that spend hours flipping through books, and we encourage you to do that.
Yeah, especially when you're finding your voice. There's nothing better than looking at good quality work in book format. Can't rate it highly enough.
Yeah, when inspiration has been something I've wanted to drive, I look for things that I aspire to want to produce something like that. And so go to galleries, go to museums, and read photo books, read quality photo magazines. You can look online as well, but online is a very, very different thing. Steve has said it, a couple of the other guys have alluded to it. The print object, the physical, tangible object changes the way that you view and think and experience photography and image making. So I highly, highly recommend just experience prints of all kinds and find things that appeal to you, and then seek to capture in your own work what those feelings are when you see those prints that move you.
Yeah, and get out for exposure.
Yeah, and I was going to say too, get together with your colleagues like we did. Get a group together and put together your own show, and maybe it's you put it up at a coffee shop or a little bistro or something where you can get your work up on walls and share with the public. And that group gives you a little bit of support and confidence. It's it's a little bit, I think in some ways easier to be in a group show because there's multiple people with the same goal.
Well, and to that point too, Greg, like it's this group was so supportive, and everybody, like, I mean, I look at all of the photographers being accomplished in their own right, but there was never a sense of competition. Like there was never a sense of comparing one body of work to another. It was a matter of everyone working to support the overall impression of this body of work as an entirety, not just individuals within the walls of the gallery. And there's yeah, a ton to be said. There's strength in numbers, absolutely.
Absolutely. And I love what you titled it, Six Point of View, because it really
That was
is.
Greg.
Greg, I love the title because each of you have such a unique perspective. You've showcased such a unique body of work, but there still is some elements that tie them together into something cohesive.
It's cohesive, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, everyone.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And I just want to thank the audience for tuning in tonight. Of course, I'll mention it one last time that if you're in Calgary in the local area, make sure you check out Points of View. So that's 6 spelled with the number 6. I'll put the link in the comments one more time, but it's in the 500 Collective Gallery, and you can check it out this Saturday from 11 to 5, as well as on the 15th of October. And so again, just make sure that if you're new to our channel that you subscribe if you want to see great content like this. Let us know what you think in the comments below, and we'll be sure to check you again next time.